So our next panel is going to come from tables that are in final stages of negotiations, being Comox and Kitselas. Really thrilled. Ashley Wright, I've dealt with Ashley over a number of years on a number of occasions. And Ashley, it's always inspiring to have a conversation with you. I've recently come to know Coral Mackay, who worked extensively in the treaty department, particularly in the area of eligibility and enrollment very extensively. Recently, congratulations, has been elected as a council member for Comox First Nation. So I think that's fantastic, and what a dynamic team you have over there. And also Dr. David Try, who is the senior negotiator for the Kitselas First Nation. And we wanted to go into looking at some of the work that's being done by existing treaty tables already. So we thank David Try, Dr. David Try from Kitselas, also Ashley and Coral from Comox, who've got extensive experience in this area and many others. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you've got some wonderful presentations that we'll be able to share as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and Coral first. Dean is going to put up their presentation and they will be co-presenting. So welcome.
Thank you, Angela. I mean, to start off, it's such an honor and privilege to be asked to speak at the panel today. We sit alongside some really amazing individuals and people who continually inspire us. So we're very, very thankful for being asked to participate in today's session. So we're going to cover and share our candid experience in eligibility and enrollment with Comox. We'll go over a little about who we are. We'll talk about an overview, just a high-level bird's-eye view overview of eligibility and enrollment, or as we often call it, E&E. We'll talk about the importance of capacity building. This one was a really key aspect for Comox as we move closer to ratification. We'll share a bit about timelines and work planning. I'll sprinkle a little bit of budget in there as well. Coral will speak to the data management and our thinking around that. We'll talk about some communications, but ultimately we're really just scratching the surface when it comes to the communications. It's kind of like an onion, and there's so many layers. It's very complex, and it really informs so many pieces of whether it's capacity building, the timelines, the work planning, the data management, and then of course engagement with the community. We've got a couple of closing comments at the end, and then we can move into Q&A. So a little bit about us. My name is Ashley Wright. I am a member of the Comox First Nation. I grew up in Comox on Reserve and moved away, oh gosh, in 2004. I went to Vancouver Island University. Back then it was Malaspina. And then it transitioned into VIU while I was there. I've also done some schooling at UBC for professional project management, and I've worked for Comox in various capacities since 2014 in economic development, and then broke off into consulting, where I've worked with the treaty team for 5 years now in preparing us for that transition from Indian Act to self-government. And I specialize in project management and governance. I have 3 kids, so it's a busy life. And I live, work, and play within the traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. I'll let Coral introduce herself.
Thank you, Ashley. Coral Gayuthun La Comox. Good morning, everyone. My name is Coral Mackay, and I'm a proud member of the Comox First Nation. Very excited and honored to have been asked to present today on such an important and exciting topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And thank you to everyone who made time out of their busy schedules to be here today, and to BCTC for hosting and facilitating, and to all of the presenters and participants today. So just a little background on me. In 2021, I moved home after living away for, probably 15 years, and I accepted the role as the eligibility and enrollment coordinator on the Comox Treaty team. It was a very exciting opportunity for me as a student whose studies were focused on public administration, political science, and Indigenous studies at UVic. So through this process, I was really able to utilize my skills and learning in a very, very practical way. I was promoted fairly early on into a project management role and worked on various initiatives. So between 2021 and 2023, I was tasked with creating forms, guidelines, policies, and procedures. I worked with a company to develop an enrollment database that would support our needs and outputs throughout this process. I established our treaty office. So prior to 2021, our team was entirely remote. So it was really important to us that through this process, we had a dedicated space to conduct our work out of, and for our members to come to fill out their forms, to ask questions, and even just spend some time with us. I also engaged quite extensively with modern treaty nations to learn what worked for them and what didn't work so much, and raise my hands up to the modern treaty nations. Comox wouldn't be where we are today without just the gracious and generous time that was spent with us from those who went before us. So thank you to each and every one of you, and there's some who are here today. I also was heavily involved in communications, so both internally and out to our community, which was really meaningful work. As Ashley mentioned, quite complex, but very meaningful. In 2023, I was elected as a first-term councillor for our nation and effectively had to step away from my role. But thankfully, I still get to support this work from the leadership table and as an independent consultant, which is the capacity I'm participating in today. So thank you again to everyone who came out to participate today. So from our perspective, eligibility and enrollment is such an important aspect of treaty making. If you don't already have a membership code, your nation will be taking on the inherent right to determine its own membership through this process. This is a huge act of self-governance and self-determination just on its own, and has become a key message out to our community. So through this process, each nation will be responsible for determining and agreeing to their eligibility criteria, or who will become a member or citizen under their treaty, and ultimately how those folks will enroll. So in terms of timing, this process can begin once your nation starts to prepare for the ratification of your constitution and treaty. And once you've received your E&E funding, it will be time to prepare, hire, and train your E&E person. And once that person has been onboarded, trained, and is feeling confident in the role, then they should really begin engaging with members and eligible members as early as possible. So from our perspective as a frontline worker, the E&E person will become the point of contact for many members and holds an important role in building trust, transparency, and accountability. So building relationships early cannot be stressed enough, and is important, as this process can feel quite technical. It's very procedural. It can feel almost bureaucratic, and we've had feedback, it can even feel colonial. From our perspective, not a lot of people love filling out paperwork, and so the E&E person will be tasked with ensuring that the process is clear, that it's well defined, and that it is aligned with the E&E chapter. They will need to develop procedures and forms, determine where information will be stored, and will need to ensure that good practices are implemented and followed. On the flip side to that, so much of this work is member-centered and forward-facing. So for example, the E&E person will need to engage with and inform members well in advance of what the process will look like, what supports will be available, and this will hopefully help ease any apprehension about this process that can feel quite procedural. Relationships really help, and that's been our experience thus far. So in my previous role, I spent a lot of time with our members answering or fielding questions. So be prepared by educating yourself, not just on E&E, but on the treaty itself. You will receive all questions of all sorts, and it's really great to be able to just engage with your members with honesty and authenticity. It really does go a long way. And I also just briefly wanted to touch on family tree or genealogy work, as it has two major benefits to this process. So first, it really is a nation building exercise. There was a lot of positive energy around this work, and it's obviously ongoing and it will never end. But there were so many stories shared through this process. It was really sacred work. Specifically our elders who provided so much context to our community and how we came to be. For Comox specifically, we have quite a few adoptees, and just the incredible work that families have done to keep our children within our community is just amazing. And so there was a lot of stories and just understanding gained of our community and what that looks like. Second, it provides an understanding of your membership today and who may be joining through this process. So it's a great way to track all the new babies and the folks who do not have status and may never have status under the Indian Act. So we've identified 4 key areas of focus related to eligibility and enrollment. So the first one being capacity building. It's such an important part of preparing for self-government to build the internal capacity of your team. And do not underestimate the amount of time that it takes to work through this. And yeah, don't undervalue the process of building that internal capacity. We also cannot stress the importance of corporate memory and knowledge. The knowledge that is gained through this process will be of benefit to the nation as it transitions to self-government. Having people that know where we've been, where we are, and where we are going into the future has been so beneficial. The next one being timelines and work planning. So strong, well thought out plans that align with your ratification timelines will ensure that your scope of work and budget remains on track. So, I know Ashley's going to speak more to work planning a little later on in the presentation, but it really is important work. Data management. So data management can be really daunting. However, you really have to have careful consideration around where you will house your data to ensure a seamless enrollment process. Some of the two major things that we found through this process were security and functionality. So in terms of reporting, you don't want a leggy database that has a hard time reporting what you need from it. And so those were 2 main things for us. Communications. So communications on the what, how, where, when, and why enroll is critical to building trust and transparency and ensuring that your members are well informed well in advance.
Great. So a key aspect when I joined the treaty team 5 years ago was that at that point our treaty team was mostly non-members. They are extremely valuable and integral individuals to the treaty team, but we didn't have a ton of members participating in the treaty team itself. I think we had one, maybe two. So the focus over the past 5 years is really, you know, in a bigger picture, bigger than E&E, is building the internal capacity of the treaty team. And the E&E role is such an integral role to the team, as well as nation building. As Coral stated earlier, the role is so much more than simply enrolling members into the treaty. This role is communicating the reality of the constraints of the Indian Act, you know, through the potential erosion of membership, well, especially in the case of Comox, versus the autonomy of self-government, where you have the ability to become more inclusive of membership. It's important to take the time to train and mentor the E&E person, whether they're going to be a coordinator or a project manager, or if you're going to have multiple E&E individuals, and provide them the opportunities for growth and capacity building within the nation. The role is very member driven, and having a member fill this role will enhance and build trust, transparency, and accountability with the nation members. The E&E role is crucial to communicating the barriers that will be removed and the autonomy of decision making that the nation will gain from self-government. Here at this point, I'm talking about more than eligibility and enrollment. It's you know, looking at the bigger picture. When we've engaged with the modern treaty nations, they've all said that the treaty was their ability to unlock the potential of their lands or their capacity or their resources or economic development. And, you know, recognizing that each of the nations has unique characteristics and strengths, the treaties provided the nations that tool or mechanism to unlock that potential. Another lesson learned from the modern treaty nations, as Coral had alluded to earlier, is that retaining the corporate knowledge and history that is gained is so critical. You know, looking at why things were negotiated. You know, the treaties are very, very complex, and even one line of the treaty can mean so many different things. You know, so it's been really, really important to try and build the capacity and retain that corporate history on why things were negotiated. Now, this is going to be really important when it comes to the startup phase that you heard Gerald speak to earlier. So that is after ratification and before effective date. You've got a 2 to 4 year period where your team is getting ready to implement the treaty. And that E&E individual will play a key role during this time. And will, you know, enrollment will carry forward into implementation. You know, it is really, really important to commit the time to orient and train the E&E person. And just as, you know, I think about the last 5 years that I've been on the treaty team and how things have changed so much in that 5 years. Things are always changing in these times of reconciliation and treaty making. So we're continually learning and adding tools to our toolbox. At Comox, we've developed a fairly robust orientation package to onboard the E&E coordinator or new council members, new team members, or even admin staff as we think about that transition, which includes, you know, the various roles and responsibilities we see now under the treaty team. Summaries become huge. We've sort of tailored our communications tools that we've developed into key pieces of the orientation package. So we're keeping it high level. We've got, you know, you start that base knowledge through looking at summaries, looking at visuals of the timelines and the bigger picture and what E&E really means. We have learning materials through podcasts and videos and various brochures. So it's, we're really trying our best to document everything that we can in various ways of learning, so that it's beneficial not only now, but into the future. So in terms of timelines, some of the important considerations of the various timelines, you want to think about, when are you getting the land cash offer? And then you start looking at, when is the handshake going to take place? And after the handshake, there's about a 3-ish month period before initialing. And then once the treaty's initialed, then you've got a couple-month period where you're preparing to hire the E&E committee, the ratification committee, and get them trained up. Once they're trained up, you'll begin the campaign. And although here you can see that we have the constitution vote and the treaty vote separate, there are some nations that are doing them at the same time. In the case of Comox, we are doing the constitution vote and the treaty vote separate, and we'll run our campaigns for about 3 months. It's also really important to try and have clear expectation of timelines between what your nation wants, what BC wants, and what Canada wants. Because if we're not on the same page, then the E&E work plan and E&E budget can either have to extend in the case of Comox. When we hired Coral, we anticipated having our land cash offer. We hired her in June of 2021, and I think we were thinking by fall we'd have the land cash offer, and timelines continued to shift and shift and shift. We now have our land cash offer, which is really great, but we've worked very, very hard and been very clear in our engagements with Canada and BC that the timeline, the expectation of timelines is really, really important, not only for internally within the treaty team, but when the E&E person is going out and engaging with membership, it's so important to have that clear expectation of timelines with the membership as well. I'd also note, each of these milestones that you see on the screen are sort of a trigger point for the other milestones. So you can't have the handshake without a land cash offer. You can't have the initialing without the handshake. So each one is a trigger point for the next. It's also, not only important for the work plan but it's also, it informs the work plan, but it also is really critical to the budget. As you heard from Gerald earlier, there's a certain amount that each nation gets. And if your timeline is continually shifting, you will have to get very creative on how to stretch that budget out. So thank you, Canada, for sharing the templated work plan. It is very, very similar to what Comox submitted. So when we were looking at what we'd want to include for our eligibility and enrollment, it's important to have the anticipated timeline, creating and compiling the training materials. So the training materials inform the orientation package and an onboarding package for those that are joining. And when I think about nations that have multiple nations under one negotiating umbrella, having that strong orientation package will be key. You'll likely have, some crossover between the nations, but each nation does have unique characteristics, which you'll want to factor in. You want to look at hiring and training for the E&E role, engagement with the modern treaty nations to scope, document, and understand lessons learned. That has been an integral piece to, the understanding the scope of what eligibility and enrollment is. And we can't thank the modern treaty nations enough for their candid nature to just come out and share information with us. Coral will speak to the database development later. We incorporated a development of family trees, drafting and creating enrollment forms. Don't underestimate the amount of forms that have to get created as well. There are a significant amount of forms that get created. Maybe Coral can speak to that after this. But drafting procedures as well as the term of reference for the E&E committee. In the case of COMOX, we wanted to have a terms of reference as well as the procedures for the E&E committee to review. It's not, saying that it's set in stone and this is what the E&E procedures are for the committee, because in the chapter language, it does state that they will set out the procedures. But there's so much work that is going on between the land cash offer and the ratification that the more you can do to prepare in advance, the better off you will be. We also included hiring and training of the E&E committee. A lot of, the intention of creating a strong orientation and onboarding package from the get-go, and we just add things as new things come about. But it's, you will have that orientation package for new members, for committee members, as well as communications for engagement as well. You'll want to establish the enrollment appeals board. So in the various treaties, you'll have to look at what the chapter language says, whether it's 120 days prior to ratification, you have to have the appeals board set up. But a trigger for that would be around the same time that you have the E&E committee established. You'll want to establish the enrollment appeals board. We also included engagement with members and eligible members and preparation of data for the ratification committee. So a big part of the E&E coordinator or the E&E role, whatever your nation is going to call it, will be to ensure that all of the eligible member data is ready to go and will be shared with the ratification committee once they are struck. We also built in reporting into our work plan. I will say that the E&E reporting is a lot less onerous than the TRM reporting. But you still have to, I can see some laughter in the videos. I also do all the reporting for the treaty related measures. So you still have to report on the activities that are completed, and you do have to, show the budget allocation. But in terms of the nitty-gritty little PDF forms that don't work half the time, you don't have to worry about that. So that's great.
So Ashley mentioned forms, and geez, I created a lot of forms. So absolutely, it's not something you should underestimate. In terms of applications, I created applications that would speak to current members, so people currently on the ban list, as well as eligible members. They will need to provide additional members and our people who are currently on the ban list, as well as adoptees. There's a lot of standardized forms. So once someone submits an application, you'll need to respond to them, whether they've been approved, rejected, or you require additional information. So I created the standardized forms to send out to our applicants. The terms of reference, that's an onerous process to ensure that everything is aligned and speaks to each other, as well as the procedures. I know someone had mentioned earlier, I think it was Joyce Lynn, had a question about folks who are currently enrolled with another nation or under a different treaty. So Comox, we decided the process is we're going to have folks who are transferring fill out a statutory declaration of their intention to unenroll, and that is made very, very clear in the application process, and will be the responsibility of the eligibility and enrollment coordinator to ensure that folks transferring understand that process, as well as have assistance through that process. I believe we also have a draft BCR for them to request to be further intention to leave which other nation they're currently a member of. So we, and that brings up kind of some intricacies as well. You don't want to put someone in a position where they're asking to leave another nation in the event that your treaty is not ratified. So we really did try and create a process that was fair, and that we were following our processes and procedures for good data management and tracking purposes. So data management, obviously plays a significant role in self-government. So for example, good data management will support planning, it supports coordination, communication, negotiations, and Ashley has mentioned, plays a significant role in reporting as well. So first, you will want to begin by gathering data early and often. Some methods or places to start would be with your family tree work, compiling information at community events, or conducting demographics work. So Comox conducted a TRM where we did an overview of demographics of our community and what that looks like into the future, based on the Indian Act and kind of where our membership is going under the Indian Act and what that looks like. We have a lot of 6-2 status individuals, myself included, and so with the second generation cutoff, that has some pretty serious implications on our membership into the future. So next, you will need to determine that, where you will house your data. This is a really big job. So for example, you might use Excel or the current software your nation uses, or you might want to consider something entirely different. Whatever you choose, you will need to consider its security and reporting features, its functionality, accessibility, is it user-friendly, and who will have access and who will hold the pen on your database. So for Comox, we tried to work with the system our nation currently uses. However, we determined that it didn't quite support the reporting that we needed from it. There was also issues with information sharing between administration and our treaty team. I know we're not unique in those challenges. So for us, at the end of the day, it just became easier to develop our own database where we could really build in our communications needs into the database, as well as to ensure that we have a seamless process and we're not dealing with a clunky system when, this process really ramps up. We won't have time to be managing a defunct system. And so it just ultimately worked out that, it was easier to build a database than to use something that wasn't working already. Because of the type of information that you will be receiving from enrollees, confidentiality and compliance are very, very important. So ensure that you know your database well in advance of enrollment, and be prepared to communicate how your data will be stored, who has access, and how it will remain private and confidential. I received a lot of questions around that, so I can't stress that enough. You'll want to be able to communicate that to people, and there's a lot of worries around security right now, and so it's just really important that you can answer those questions confidently to ease any concerns. So communications, such an important, time-consuming, but meaningful process. So engage as early and as often as your budget allows. So I think we used any and every opportunity that we could to share information very early in our process. And to be mindful of that, what you communicate, when and how it is communicated will help guide you to ratification. So for example, in terms of membership, ensure that your community understands what membership looks like pre and post treaty. So for example, you'll want to expand on what growth for your nation will look like, if there are any impacts with that growth, what it looks like to, quote, close the gap between status members and incoming members. There will be quite a few questions about that. As I had mentioned, Comox, we have a lot of 6'2" folks and a lot of new babies who may potentially never receive status under the Indian Act. So this is a particular of interest to those people, where they can really see themselves and how they fit kind of into the scheme of kind of membership under the Indian Act, or if you have a membership code, it'll be a different conversation. But for Comox, we're moving from the Indian Act straight to potentially self-government. So there's a lot of engagement that needs to happen throughout that process. It's really important that you are clear in your communications around why, when, and how to enroll. So ensure the community that the E&E person will be available to support them through this process and available to answer any questions that they may have. Be prepared to answer challenging questions with confidence and authenticity. Of course, sometimes you won't have the answer, and it's just really important that you ensure that you'll do the work and we'll get back to those community members. Be honest in your approach, tackle myths early. So Q&As are a really effective tool. We heard a lot of chatter at the community level, and there's really good discourse and dialogue going on. It means people are paying attention and listening and engaging, and so I think we did a really great job and continue to do a really great job of tackling the hard questions and tackling myths up front. A lot of people, there's concerns about this process, and it's really important to address those and speak to, maybe where in the treaty it contradicts some of those myths, not the treaty being contradictory, but, maybe there's not so much truth to the misinformation going around. And so it's really important to engage in that process with your people in an honest way. It's also really important to provide different methods of communication for different learning styles. So, for example, you could produce brochures, summaries, Q&As, podcasts, videos. I had the great honor of being the star in a couple of videos on E&E and a podcast about E&E where we just had a really candid conversation. You could create graphic visuals or presentations. Some folks will want to sit down face to face. They'll want to go through the treaty chapter to chapter. Some people, the video will really speak to them. The Q&As will really speak to them. And some people might just want to engage over email, and that's okay. So just be available and be open. yeah, just honest in your approach.
There's a couple of items that we wanted to bring forward, and it most certainly isn't resolved in the case of Comox, and I don't know if it will ever, hopefully at some point it will get resolved, but in our engagements with modern treaty nations, it's been flagged, as well as some of our engagements with the negotiating tables currently. And it's, you know, we want to highlight that there will be a fiscal gap between status members versus eligible members, as the FFA, or Fiscal Finance Agreement, only funds status members. So there, you know, there most certainly is, and I'm sure we'll hear from the modern treaty nations in the latter half, that there's opportunity. Like I said earlier, it's the treaty's the opportunity to unlock the potential of the lands or economic development, and there will be possibilities in the future to close that gap, but an immediate gap is a fiscal gap between status members versus eligible members. And some of the topics that we discussed today are important consideration for your nation or nations. And we acknowledge that each nation is unique and distinguishable from one another, and that's a point of celebration. So I put my hands up to everyone today and acknowledge that your nation or nations are going through a very, very big undertaking right now. And we hope that we provided you with some meaningful information to help your nation or nations on their journey to self-government. Kitselas imot.
Ashley and Coral, wow. What an amazing presentation that you've made in a half an hour and captured so many of the critical elements of eligibility, enrollment, capacity building, communications. Phenomenal, great resources, both of you, and thank you so much for the time that you put into finding a way to summarize it in such a great way, and also to come here and share this with the group as well. This presentation in and of itself is absolutely amazing, and one that probably every treaty table should see at some point. The investment that you talk about in terms of how critical this work is in building capacity is amazing. I've heard both of you talk about the critical role of the eligibility and enrollment coordinator and the importance of that being one of your citizens. And I think that we've seen in almost every nation how critical that position is. And the two of you are excellent examples of that. Coral, you know, you were in the eligibility and enrollment position and are now a council member in your community. I think that's happened in just about every community, the capacity that's built through not only eligibility enrollment, but the whole treaty negotiation process is building amazing amounts of capacity in our communities. And many of you know, in my own community, John Jack started off as a member of our Constitution Committee and became an executive assistant on council, did the eligibility, enrollment, and communications, was on council, and today is our chief councillor. Just amazing. You know, we worry about building that capacity in our community, but people like the two of you show how much capacity we have in our communities, and we need to reach out and unleash that enthusiasm in some fashion. As I say, so many critical points that you've raised, I couldn't begin to touch on them all, but that need for overall communications, absolutely critical. I love the discussions about creating, documenting your journey, creating orientation, robust orientation packages for new people coming on board. That's so important. It's so difficult for new people coming on to get a grasp on everything that's happened. The kind of videos and communication materials that you've used will go such a long way in continuing to tell that story. And I'm just going to put a little plug in right now, because in my own community, we've found 12 years into it now that we have forgotten to tell that story internally. We told it so many times. I tell it in these kind of forums and to treaty negotiation tables all of the time. I did a session with the council last year, and some of them were new, and they said, we didn't know that. We didn't know that that's how we got here. So I really appreciated your comments about making sure to document your history and continue to talk about it. I can't say enough about how impressed I was, and I'm sure all were, with your presentation. David, can I just ask you to quickly introduce yourself? We've been acquainted for a number of years, and I always appreciate my conversations with David and learn something every time I talk to him, and I'm sure that will happen again today. So, David, why don't you introduce yourself and go into your presentation?
I'm David Try. I moved to Kitselas about just under 20 years ago after I completed a career in the federal government. So I work all across the federal government and pretty well at every level. And I also worked as a prof and a dean in post-secondary education for a while. And this is my retirement job. So you can guess that I'm a little delusional about how much work was involved. But it's something I enjoy immensely. I joined the treaty office about 3 years ago, but because I thought the treaty was struggling quite a bit. And at the time I joined, I decided that the two priorities I had was be a master of the circus ring, basically get all the consultants and all the staff rowing in the same direction, trying to drive this treaty to a conclusion, which I believe we're going to hit very shortly. I do believe we're going to actually get to our handshake sometime in the next month. Think of what that means. Sometime next by the end of October, all parties have agreed we'll complete negotiations. And then we'll begin the process of moving into eligibility. I decided that I needed to hire a bunch of new staff. And so all the staff working for the Kitselas Treaty are Kitselas members. I decided that was critical in having credibility in getting to a yes vote, really. And I stand up repeatedly and say, I count myself as one of the members because I've lived here for 20 years. And so not as a, and that seemed, they all know me. So I guess I'm fairly well respected. Ultimately, the critical part, the second part I want to do after I get to a yes vote with this team of consultants and staff was to have the community not be say, what, you're doing a treaty, but to be kind of fully engaged in doing this. So we've done a ton of community outreach, of which eligibility and enrollment is going to be the next chunk of that. And I'm going to try to talk about eligibility just for a minute or two, and then kind of position it. And then, and so I think that that ultimately people care about what's a treaty based on how close it affects them. And this is my kind of casual thought about it. The things that affect my wife or me or my family or my community in Kitselas, the closer they are to affecting me, the more likely I am to take a strong interest in what's in the treaty. And so as we do communications, what we're doing is trying to paint these pictures to explain to people, how will this affect them? And where will it affect them? And what's in it for them? And the more that we can do that, the more people are going to take an interest in it. And that directly translates into enrolling in the treaty. Because right now, no people are enrolled in treaty because treaty enrollment is not open yet, as it is for other nations in the same position as ourselves. But I think that having a thought about how this is going to roll out, I mean, how are people going to perceive it, is critical into having a successful enrollment strategy and successful enrollment itself. We have divided our community, well, I have divided our community into 3 chunks. There's 182 Kitselas members living on reserve who are of voting age. I have a very well designed or developed and maintained list of the eligible voters. When somebody dies, we move them off that list. When somebody turns 18, we add them to that list. Of course, I have a list of all the people that are not 18 yet, and we add them to the list one by one, basically, on their birthday. 182 adult voting members living in community. 117 members living in Terrace or Thornhill, basically within 10-ish kilometers of our community, or at least where I live in the community. And then 234 living somewhere else basically in Canada or the US. There's a few in the US and none that I know of anywhere else in the world. So we have 300 on local or on reserve or in community, and 234 living far away. That's my casual impression about how many people are going to vote. 95% of the people living in community will vote, maybe more. 80 to 90% of the people living nearby, 50 to 2/3, half to 2/3 of the people living in Vancouver or Prince George or, Alberta or Nova Scotia will vote. And the reason why I think that is because the treaty will fundamentally, profoundly impact people slowly in community, less so locally, and almost not at all living far away. And the reason for that is that all the things that the people living far away might have lost, tax exemptions being central, status, are now protected in the treaty, and they will not lose. But still, I don't see them having a huge enrollment. We will advertise and we will work hard to advertise to everybody, but I don't think we're going to have a huge take up on it. The people in the top 4 boxes there, basically the Kitselas members who are on the Kitselas banned list, are going to be take 90% of the people are going to take 10% of the time to enroll. They're going to be on the Kitselas banned list. Our treaty is drop dead clear that if you're on the banned list and you enroll, you're in. The committee will rubber stamp that once we confirm that in fact you're on the banned list. We will not spend much time or energy on those top 4 boxes, upper left-hand corner. Everybody else will represent 10% of the people that are enrolled ultimately and take 90% of the time. And those are all the people that have ancestry or that were adopted or were the descendant of somebody who had ancestry or adopted. And they're going to be complex. And I divide them into kind of 2 subgroups: the people who are not on anybody else's band or treaty nation list, membership list, I'm going to say that, or the people who are on another nation or treaty nation's band list or treaty nation list. In my community or our community, the nearest community is about 10 kilometers away. I know because I bike over there to get some exercise frequently, and it's 10 kilometers each way. And I would say, very informally, that 80 or 90% of Kitselas members can draw direct history of ancestry to somebody living to a Kitsim-Kalim member. And that is just for the human relations, just human behavior, that we tend to marry somebody from the next community. And so mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or great-great-grandma and great-great-grandpa got together over the last 100, 200, 300, 400 years, fell in love and got married and chose one of those 2 communities to live in. But now all of their ancestors have an ancestry that will link back to one of those 2 communities, or actually either community. So wherever they choose to be registered, and we have the same situation with lower numbers for the Nisga'a in the north, about 100 kilometers, the Haisla in the south, about 65 kilometers, the Gitxsan to the east, about 150-ish kilometers, and other coastal nations, about 140 kilometers to the west. So ultimately, I consider that this will be the ultimate challenge for enrollment, is how to sort out and find evidence, to work with applicants to find the evidence of their ancestry or their adoption. If they're legally adopted, well, we'll have their court records, we'll find them. But adopted by Kitselas culture, which is really not much of a defined term. I have raised 2 daughters with my wife and 3 more kids, 2 from Telegraph Creek and 1 from Watson Lake in the Yukon. But yet are those kids my custom adoption kids? Not really clear. And we'll have to work hard to try and find A, evidence, and B, make a reasoned decision that's subject to appeal. At every step of the way, it's of course appealable. That's what all those little black triangles is. And this is just a slide out of our policy and procedures manual that we've worked on over the last year, trying to get ready, because we are about to open enrollment, I think, on January 1st. And we'll be enrolling people for about a year to the first vote, 11 to 12 months until the first vote. No, when I say that there are going to be challenges, the challenges that I see first is to find the evidence, but we have historical band records going back to about 1906. And before 1906, those records do not exist. So, that will help us quite a bit. But the second part is, how will we find ways to confirm that the person applying for entrance in the Kitselas, who's a treaty member or a member of another First Nations, will in fact join Kitselas? So we've got some work to do on that, and I am working on that, and I feel cautiously optimistic that we'll find a fair and equitable manner that will withstand court challenges if necessary. So what have we been doing practically? Well, we're expanding our team. We've gone from 1 person to about 7 right now. We've we've got about another 15 different consultants working for us in different files. Most of them will be not working for us once we get to the handshake. Most of them are helping us get to the handshake, or the work they'll do will be much reduced. And we'll expand by another 3 or 4 people. All of those people, all of the staff people, except myself and the chief negotiator, will be working basically on communications. As I mentioned, I started thinking that communications was a critical thing. And so every month for the last 3 years, we've had a monthly communication information session or dinner where we've tried to slice up the treaty and present one chapter or one chunk of it. We advertise like till the cows come home. We have all kinds of events, a website, social media, mail outs every month, email outs every month. We probably spend $250,000 a year on communication. I expect to double that next year. We intend to do house-to-house meetings, treaty tours. I'm looking to rent an airplane so we can fly around and show people what the treaty land will look like. But we got a bus, coffee shop, pizza nights, just the kind of things that you're probably already doing or have thought about doing. And the last thing we want to do is track everything we do with to a penny basically, so we can make sure that we know what we've done and who we've talked to. So we'll build up an evidence of, we talked to you on these dates about these things. People are afraid of the change that they don't understand. So our key goal is to try to help them understand what does the treaty propose, what changes does it propose. And as we have a series we've called The Myths of Treaty, including a video we're just about to release on the top 5 myths of treaty. And most of the things they don't understand are things that are never going to happen in treaty anyway. So that's a communication challenge, not a. How will E&E fit into this? We intend to use E&E as a big hype, the handshake, the initialing, and a big hype to come and join us, take a look at treaty, make an informed choice about whether treaty is something you support for yourself, your family, your community, or this nation. We intend to move from informing people about the treaty, which is what all these 30 plus monthly dinners have been about, informing people about a treaty, a part of a treaty, to selling people on the whole treaty. And to do that, we need the whole treaty. We can't be talking about it as part of a treaty. So ultimately, I feel quite confident that we're well positioned to incorporate E&E as part of selling this treaty. And that's it. So I'll just move it back to you, Angela, so we can take any questions.
Amazing, David. Thank you very much. It added very nicely to what was presented by Ashley and Coral earlier. My mind is full, and I have to think that everybody else's is as well. I am so inspired by all of you, the information that you shared, and I hope that people don't feel overwhelmed by this. But I am glad that our treaty partners from Canada and British Columbia also were invited to listen in on this conversation, really have a deep understanding of just how much work this takes in the community. I've been involved in it myself. Others on the line have been involved with that as well. And it is a huge job to make sure that our people are able to make informed decisions about what it is that we're moving forward into. And it is a great thing. We're going to hear from Kim, Valerie, and Grace this afternoon as well about some of those on the ground experiences. And I just can't help but say how impressed and thankful I am to all of you who've presented today and agreed to share your presentations with all of us as well. Just a hugely valuable resource. And yes, thank you very much to all of you.